Hello everyone, my name is Hasan Sercan Saglam, and my paper is entitled The Grid That Remained, Redating the Coastal Urban Morphology of Ayvalık. Before I start, I would like to thank to the conference organizing and scientific committee. Ayvalık is a coastal Aegean district of Balıkesir province in the northwest of Turkey. It is surrounded by Gömeç in the north, Dikili in the south, and Bergama in the east. It is not yet possible to talk about any direct positional correspondence with ancient cities that existed in the region, especially for the exact locality of the Ayvalık historical city center. There is a chronological disconnection that can be expressed with centuries. The first settlement appears in the late 16th century, according to Ottoman archival sources. It was then a significant village that the main neighborhoods were founded one after another until the mid-19th century with central parish churches. Ayvalık historical city center eventually reached its greatest extent with 11 parishes by the 20th century, all along the coastal plain and also towards the hills that rise above lower parts. The urban and architectural heritage of Ayvalık, mainly from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, is a popular research subject. However, the origin of its regular urban morphology along the coastal plain was hardly explained. It was superficially interpreted as a new development from the 1850s, as a whole supposedly formed on reclaimed lands after the return of inhabitants from exile starting from 1824 and with the help of debris that appeared after the complete destruction during the Greek Revolution in 1821. This curious but unfounded hypothesis of a massive fill area was initially put forward and championed only by Psaros for the main zones of Ayvalık with different morphological characteristics. Afterwards, it set basis for a group of later urban studies about Ayvalık and was appreciated. Therefore, as if a well-established starting point for every new study about Ayvalık, it has eventually become a significant phase of the urban chronology despite its fundamental flaws and was not questioned since then. The argument of Psaros is a rather brief factual statement simply after the testimonies of Apostolakis dated 1914 and Karamplias dated 1949, accompanied by a series of schematic plans about the historical urban development of Ayvalık. Yet, no primary source from the rich 19th century Ayvalık literature mentions such a redevelopment at all, and actually even Apostolakis and Karamplias did not mention it. Therefore, this outcome is simply an impression, actually a misinterpretation. In this case, an unstudied primary source is the 1823 cadastral plan of Ayvalık by the Italian engineer Francesco Cassai, with an excessive longitudinal format with 4 sheets in total found in the Ottoman state archives under the section Hattı Hümayun Hat. It has a linear scale of 200 meters and the plan shows the whole coastline of Ayvalık and to some extent also the road network and city blocks, as inner parts remain largely incomplete for some unknown reason. The work is actually a cadastral plan that indicates plots instead of buildings. Few of them are marked to demonstrate land use, but many of them appear unmarked, which is another curious deficiency of this work. Usual plots are scarcely marked with the numbers 2 and 3. A main artery in the center is marked with the number 4. Bold cutout dots indicate reclaimed lands along the coast, marked with the number 5. The plan has a 4-line legend in Ottoman Turkish. The plan actually shows the state by May 1823, in a time when Ayvalık was completely abandoned and devastated since June 1821 due to the Greek Revolution, when all the properties were confiscated. Its Hattı Hümayun subsection indicates that it was appertaining directly to the Ottoman Sultan himself, Mahmud II. A restoration policy was introduced in November 1823 by him, which allowed the emigrated residents to return and to get their confiscated properties back, officially commenced only in October 1824. The main arteries on the plan precisely follow modern Barbaros, Fecir, Gülbahar, Talat Paşa, Eski PTT, Gümrük, Atatürk, and Cumhuriyet streets from the south to the north. According to the plan, as of 1823, there were already some reclaimed lands from the sea through piling, which formed some individual, rather small plots along the coast. The plan also shows that the existing grid layout of Ayvalık with a surface area of roughly 12 hectares, excluding Republican extensions, certainly predates 1821 to a large extent. Thus, it perchance appeared in the 17th, 18th centuries during earlier urban expansion phases when Ayvalık was already a significant town. After primary sources, if we apply a hypothetical historical population density experiment, it appears that certainly more space is needed for the pre-1821 city than what has been suggested by the literature. Therefore, it also implies the pre-1821 existence of the coastal grid of Ayvalık. In fact, pre-19th century grid urban layouts were not that uncommon in Ottoman Anatolia. For example, Kuşadası was founded certainly in the early 17th century, as it is, though was superficially considered as a medieval Genoese colony, but is just another superficial assumption. Also, Navarino, now in Greece, and Banja Luka, now in Bosnia, are further Ottoman examples after the 16th century. Perhaps, even though the scholars did not explicitly provide the reason nor provided any further background for the striking plans after the reclamation argument, the motive was presumably a simple stylistic conditioning. The grid plan itself could only be a result of modern urbanism practices, which mainly preferred grid plans that quite often appeared after major catastrophes like fires. At first glance, the case of Ayvalık theoretically fit to all prerequisites, namely an extant grid form, a 19th century historical context, and a major catastrophe, as the general urban planning literature does not stand against such a redevelopment. Conclusion. The grid urban morphology along the plain coastline of Ayvalık was previously interpreted as a novel mid-19th century development on reclaimed lands through the debris that appeared after the destruction in 1821. However, being a significantly earlier cadastral work in the context of Turkish urban planning history, an unstudied plan dated 1823 displays that the present grid substantially predates 1821 and perchance appeared in the course of previous centuries, as there was already a significant settlement with respect to archival sources. Also, historical demographics and a retrospective population density experiment supports this hypothesis, while the formerly supposed pre-1821 layout was considerably insufficient for the estimated population. Grid plans were in use throughout the Ottoman Empire before modern urban planning practices. Interdisciplinary approaches and authentic primary sources constitute essential tools for urban history studies instead of morphological generalization after basic literature and also questionable secondary narratives. Thank you.